One of the many fallouts from the Hamas terrorist attack back in October and the war that followed has been a rise here in America when it comes to anti-Semitism, here really and abroad as well.
Yeah, today in Jerusalem is a day of remembrance, not of those lost and taken hostage by Hamas, but the horror that took place in the 1930s and 40s, the Holocaust. It's Holocaust Remembrance Day, and here in the U.S., Holocaust Remembrance Day is as designated by Congress run through Sunday, May 12th. It's designed to make sure we never forget how millions of Jews were murdered during a dark time in modern human history. For more on the significance of this day and this week, we're joined by Holocaust historian Dr. Dan McMillan. Good morning to you, and thank you for coming on the show. In a time like this, where, as Rob mentioned, anti-Semitism is on the rise, how important is the Holocaust that it's remembered, especially right now?
Well, you know, I think it's essential that people understand how this was possible. I think one of the reasons why Holocaust denial flourishes, which in turn feeds into anti-Semitism and supports it, is that it's so difficult for people to understand why it happened, because if you want the whole story, all the factors that contributed to it, it's a very long discussion. But on the other hand, there is kind of one factor that stands out above all, and that is simply that the men who did this saw no reason not to, because the ruling class of our most advanced society decided that an individual human life had no value whatsoever. And therefore, it was perfectly acceptable to slaughter people by the millions for this or that political goal. And I think that is also why the Holocaust frightens us so much. And it's also, I think, why it's the only historical event people find it necessary or want to deny happened, because it is so frightening. And I guess that's the most important thing that I'd want our audience to understand.
That's so fascinating, because I've often wondered, when you hear about denialism, whether in the face of books, facts, survivor stories, how someone can intellectually bring themselves to deny something that's provable and documented. I always wonder what that requires in one's brain to get to that point. Is it an actual denialism, or is it I'm just refusing to accept something? There is a difference.
You raise a fascinating question. You point out quite rightly that this is one of the most thoroughly documented historical events, and one in which, for decades, we've had upwards of 100,000 eyewitnesses testifying again and again at every opportunity. I think the people who are peddling this mind poison, those, I think, are people who are motivated by just an unbelievably vicious anti-Semitism and hatred for the state of Israel. But I think they gain traction because a place like Auschwitz is so extreme that even today, even someone like myself who's studied it for decades, it is very hard to make it really real in one's own mind. It is hard to imagine. It stretches the boundaries of our imagination. And then if on top of it, if no one explains to you in a straightforward, concise manner how this was possible, then it is so easy and in a way more comfortable to accept this kind of nonsense, this denial, if someone who seems halfway credible presents it to you. And I think that's kind of how the thought process works. That's obviously an oversimplification, but that's how I would put it.
So is there anything that concerns you more today than in recent years, especially when it comes to whether it's the education of the Holocaust, the denialism of it, anything that has shifted in recent years?
Well, I guess particularly in our country, of course, Holocaust, the spike in anti-Semitic incidents and hate speech is worldwide in the last 3 or 4 years. I guess what has most concerned me directly is just how the politics of prejudice of every kind have grown more toxic in our country in the last 10 years. And what exactly drives that is a whole separate discussion. But that, I guess, is what concerns me the most, as I see, coming really from both political parties, various kinds of prejudices being instrumentalized to kind of divide the American people. For sort of political reasons, for a political agenda. I know that I don't want to take us off topic, but I guess that's what worries me the most. I guess one final thing I would say, though, I don't like it when people sort of say, oh, we've learned nothing from the Holocaust and we're in imminent danger of another genocide happening again in this country. I think that since the Second World War, we and other democracies have actually made tremendous progress in reducing prejudice and in strengthening the value we place in human life. And I think in an advanced society like ours, actually another genocide, I find highly unlikely. On the other hand, corrosive prejudice that is in particular demeaning and threatening to our Jewish fellow Americans, that is a growing problem, and it's really a terrible one.
And sir, you can, and it's hard not to bring this up because we all know what's happening politically, and we're seeing now what's unfolding on college campuses because of the war in Gaza. We could be on the brink of another major ground invasion there, which only will inflame things further here. I'm just wondering from your perspective, though, do you think it's sometimes anti-Semitism that phrase gets overused in the sense that you can be sympathetic to the Palestinians, you can be critical of the way Israel's conducted this war, you can be critical of Netanyahu's politics without being an anti-Semite? Those are mutually exclusive. That line just seems to have gotten so blurred.
Well, I think it's true. I think that the whole, gosh, the October 7th invasion, I mean, the mass murder of October 7th and then the terrible loss of life in Gaza have been so shocking that it has really become very difficult for a lot of people in our country and other countries to discuss these questions in a dispassionate manner. And one of the destructive tendencies in people's thought is to automatically conflate criticism of the Netanyahu government with anti-Semitism. Because, and after all, I think probably a majority of Jewish Americans are not exactly fans of Netanyahu and his government. So it's hard to say that criticizing Netanyahu makes you an anti-Semite, but the other issue, I think, is that, but this is a whole separate discussion and a long one, but for a number of reasons over, I think, the last 30 years, sort of intellectual rigor and respect for for difference of ideas, the respectful exchange of ideas, discussions of differences, and rigorous standards of scholarship, intellectual standards have been degraded on our college campuses. As a former professor of history, that is something that I have also noticed. It's obviously a very big question, but I see it on both ends of the political spectrum on our campuses, and it's very troubling also.
And sir, real quick, 30 seconds, you alluded to this earlier, I just want to follow up. When you hear people these days listen to some of the political language that's out there, Gestapo comparisons and poisoning the blood of our country, and make comparisons between some things in our political culture with Hitler and that time, that dark time in human history, do you think that's a legitimate concern, or is it overblown and exaggerated?
I think it's a gross exaggeration, and I think it just leads to the general debasement of our language and civic culture. I do think that the democratic form of government here in the land of its birth is in trouble and has been badly degraded. On the other hand, to compare anyone in American politics to Adolf Hitler shows that you don't know anything about Hitler, and I think it's ugly and inflammatory, and it just does not help anyone.
All right, Holocaust historian Dr. Dan McMillan, thank you so much for joining us and your incredible insight. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, stay right here on Scripps News. We'll have more Morning Rush right after a quick break.